Hello, and welcome to the Heritage Minute Special Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Simon, class of 77. Today, I have the honor of sharing the studio with Colonel Retired Darrel Whitcomb, class of 69. Colonel Whitcomb is a keen observer, participant, and writer of history. During his class reunion in the fall of 2024, he emceed a fascinating session on his and his classmates' key roles in the Vietnam War. We will get into all of that. Sir, welcome to the show.
It's a real pleasure and honor to be here with you today, Steve.
Well, thank you. Hey, let's start at the beginning. How did you come to be an Air Force Academy cadet?
Well, I grew up in Southern California. I was a surfer punk and decided that as I was growing up, that I wanted to do something related to aviation.
Okay.
And of course, this was in the pre-Vietnam era. We could see as things were developing, we would probably all have some participation in the military. And so I said, gosh, maybe I can tie the two together. And so I had the good fortune of having a really good high school career counselor who pointed out to me this new institution up in Colorado called the Air Force Academy. And when I looked into it, I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I researched the procedures and petitioned or applied through my congressman, Congressman Chet Hollifield from California there, and received an appointment to be a member of the class of 1969.
Nice. Anything particularly notable or exciting about your cadet days?
Well, yeah, actually. The time that I was here, 65 through 69, directly paralleled our nation's engagement in the war we now call the Vietnam War. I remember clearly as a high school senior, draft calls were ramping up. Individuals, all of us, when we turned 18, had to register for the draft. And not too long after that, some of my classmates started getting draft notices. I did not register for the draft because when I signed into USAFA, I was 17 years old. So I guess that means I'm a draft dodger. But anyway, I got up here literally as our forces were beginning to flow into that conflict. And so my whole experience here at USAFA was framed by the war in Vietnam. All of our AOCs were either coming from or going to the war. At that time, all of our academic instructors were Air Force officers.
Right.
They were going to or coming from the war. So it was around us all the time. We would have parades on Saturdays, and they would call out officers and pin on their different awards that they received in the war. We had funerals. I can remember clearly when I got into my 2-degree and certainly 1-degree year, at the staff tower at lunch in midday there, they would announce graduates who had been killed in the war.
Right.
And all of a sudden I began to recognize some of those names from guys in 66 and 67 that I knew here that had been lost in the war. And so it was all around us. And then we had this commandant show up, Brigadier General Robin Olds, quite a charismatic, dynamic leader. Our previous commandant, General Scythe, was a very good and competent officer, but he lacked color, if you will. I mean, there was no smash there. But when Olds arrived, there was a new sheriff in town, and the spirit that he generated amongst all of us, and he turned this into a school literally for combat aviators and put a lot of emphasis on that. And so we all knew that as the war continued on, that when we graduated, we would graduate right into the war, and we would be part of that conflict.
Yeah.
So like I say, it framed our entire experience here at the Academy.
Sure. Rather sobering time to be here, knowing what lies ahead. So, of course, you graduated, went directly into pilot training,
Yes, I went to Laredo Air Force Base down in Texas. So I got a foreign tour, basically, down there on the border. Pilot training, which was 53 weeks at that time. And then coming out of that, I received my first assignment to the war. I went over to South Vietnam and flew the C-7 Caribou for a period of about 11 months, upgrading from, I arrived as a second lieutenant, and of course I got promoted while I was there, but I upgraded co-pilot and then aircraft commander and then instructor pilot. So it was a very eventful tour. Logged almost 1,000 hours over there flying that, and then interestingly enough, when towards the end of my tour, they inactivated my squadron, and we were directed to fly our caribous, our C-7 caribous, back to the United States. Now, to get to the United States from Vietnam, you have to cross the Pacific Ocean. So I had the opportunity as a young aircraft commander in the summer of 1971 to command a crew. It was just 3 of us, actually, but we flew in a gaggle of 15 other aircraft. We flew our caribou all the way across the Pacific Ocean back to California. Took us 67 flying hours, and that was quite an adventure. And so 1 year out of pilot training, I already had 1,000 hours of flight experience and a combat tour. And then I decided to re-up for a second tour over there as a forward air controller. So I retrained into the OV-10 down at Hurlburt Field, Florida, went back, and this time I was assigned to Thailand with the 23rd Tactical Air Support Squadron, flying missions primarily in Laos and Cambodia. So on this tour, I saw a whole different experience in the war. I realized that this war that we called the Vietnam War was really a theater conflict that stretched across the breadth and depth of Southeast Asia. And I spent more time in those countries than I did back in Vietnam. And then, of course, during that year, 1972, we had the Easter Offensive, we had the linebacker operations, we had all these huge operations. So it was a very eventful year doing all of that. And then in the second 6 months of my second tour, I volunteered to go into what we called the Steve Canyon program, which was a covert operation at that time in the country of Laos, where we were not allowed by treaty to have any military forces involved, but we had to because that's where the enemy was, because we were fighting a theater war. And the enemy had built through southern Laos a structure called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we were applying air power to try to cut the trail. And that's what we forward air controllers at NKP primarily were doing. We were flying the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then I stayed with the squadron until February 73. I went into my covert operation, which ended in February 73. I went back to the squadron again and then flew a third tour with the squadron, this time operating primarily in Cambodia, until 15 August 73, when we were terminated there by act of Congress. And then I stayed with the squadron for another 6 months as we maintained as a residual force in Thailand for potential ongoing operations in Southeast Asia to enforce the ceasefire agreement that we had with the North Vietnamese that, quote, ended the Vietnam War, but really didn't. And then so I came home then from those 3 assignments consecutively in March of 74 and went on to Moody Air Force Base, where I was a T-30 instructor pilot for a couple years. And then in 1977, I made the decision to leave active duty and pursue an airline career. And I went to work for a little outfit in Atlanta called Delta Airlines. I did 26 years with them, retiring as a senior international captain in 2003. But when I left active duty, as many men and now women do today, I decided that I still wanted to be involved in the Air Force, so I converted into the Air Force Reserve and actually proceeded then to have another full career as an Air Force Reservist until retiring in 1999 with 30 years. So I had an opportunity really to have 2 full careers, and it highlights the fact that one of the things that the Air Force Academy does do is it produces a lot of airline pilots for our nation because we have the opportunity to use that training in the civilian capacity. But quite honestly, I did as many do. I then chose to stay in the Guard or Reserve and have a whole nother career. And if you go out now into our Guard and Reserve, it's full of Air Force Academy graduates.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I talk to the young cadets today, I make sure they understand all the options that are available for them in their future.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, one vignette, I guess, from Vietnam. I understand you had to bail out one time. I wonder if you could tell us about that experience, if it's not too traumatic.
Well, no. Again, the war that I fought was in Southeast Asia. So I'm going to beat that drum again because when we talk about the airman's perspective of the war, it's very different than the perspective of a young guy who was a grunt walking through the rice paddies in South Vietnam. He fought the Vietnam War. We airmen fought in Southeast Asia because our airplanes that we flew out of our bases in South Vietnam and in Thailand, we flew across the breadth and depth of the theater on an hourly basis. We were over there all hours of the day and night doing all kinds of things. And so what was the question again?
About your shoot down.
Oh, yeah, my shoot down. Well, when I was a Raven forward air controller in Laos, again, that was a covert operation, which seemed to really attract a lot of academy graduates to go into it incidentally. I was up flying in 01 one day, and I got an emergency call from a ground team that they were being ambushed. I responded to them, flew to their location, saw where they were, saw the enemy forces around them, and proceeded then to attack those enemy forces. And when I did that, they decided that they were going to try to shoot me down. So I started taking pretty steady ground fire from them, small caliber, but I was down low, so anything could hit me. And I got my engine shot out. And I did not have a parachute, so I could not jump out of the airplane.
Oh, wow.
And so basically I had to put the airplane on the ground, and I was fortunate enough to be high enough that I was able to glide out of the local area and get back to friendly territory before I actually put the airplane down. Okay. So it was kind of a semi-non-event, but I mean, I was flat-ass shot down, and I was going down. Yeah, and that was very normal in the Raven operations. Just about everybody up there in those operations, given where we were operating, fighting the same North Vietnamese forces that we were also fighting in South Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, because they always saw it as a theater war. But on that particular day, I was down low, and they bagged me, and I got shot down.
No, thankfully you made it. So no parachutes because of the speed or the altitude that the aircraft flew at, or what?
Well,
were they not equipped with that?
We had the option of wearing a chest pack if we wanted to, but the airplane is so small that to have that big chest pack in front of you there in the cockpit, it really restricted what you could do. Okay. And when we were operating, a lot of times we were using binoculars to look out the window, or we were putting in airstrikes, so we're maneuvering constantly. We were referring to maps for locations and good coordinates and all that kind of stuff. And it was just very encumbering to have that chest pack in front of you. And so we were given the option of not carrying a parachute, and I chose not to do that.
Okay. Very interesting. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn our attention to your reunion session and the impact of the war on your class. I had the honor of attending that event. You paid tribute, of course, to the 9 69ers killed in action. The class's 2 POWs both attended and spoke very eloquently, along with many others who described their war experiences. What was your motivation for arranging that gathering?
Well, we gave that a lot of thought. Again, our class graduated right into the war, so this was a seminal event for most of my classmates. And interestingly enough, I think at about the 20th reunion or something like that, a bunch of us did get together and start talking about the war, but strangely enough, we never repeated that at any later reunion. And I don't know why. I surmise that maybe it was so far behind us by then. Many people said, well, so what? I will say, though, that when we put out the idea to our class to do this, the responses were mixed. A lot of guys were interested. They were eager. Some guys politely said no thanks, and other guys said there's no effing way I'm going to go back and think and talk about that war. It was a huge national mistake. I'm sorry I participated. It's all behind me now. I don't even want to discuss it.
Okay.
And so we had that range of responses, but enough guys were interested in doing it and contributing to it that we decided to go ahead and set it up. And our plan was to have about a 3-hour session, but in reality, we ended up running over. Yeah. And even with that, I got nowhere near the number of speakers that I had anticipated. My plan was to try to hold each guy down to about 5 minutes or so. Well, that was ridiculous because, as you may have noticed, one of my POWs spoke for 42 minutes.
Right.
But I wasn't going to shut him down.
Exactly.
He earned that. Got a lot of very positive responses from that. And again, the intent was to just allow guys to get up and talk about their experiences from the war. For many of them, they hadn't done anything like that since they'd come back. And so the whole idea was just to create a friendly forum where they felt comfortable discussing that period of our lives. And in a couple of cases, it got kind of emotional, as you would expect.
Of course.
But we got a good response from the families. We had a large group of cadets that were there from the Cadet History Club that participated in it, and so I thought all in all it went quite well.
Yeah, I thought it did as well. So currently you're teaching. Is that what you're up to these days?
Not officially. I'm retired now.
Okay.
I do some informal teaching. I've had the opportunity here now to lecture the last couple of years in the Vietnam history course.
Okay, that's
with Dr. Simonson and his folks, and I have been invited a few times by the history department to come over in various venues and talk about the war. And then in the summer times, I work a lot with the cadets going through the combat survival training program, because in later years, in part because of the writing that I had done about rescue, I had the opportunity to work for one of our government agencies called the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency for 15 years, and I got very heavily and deeply involved in that subject matter. Back in the Vietnam era days, we called all this search and rescue. Later on, we started using the term combat search and rescue. And then in the 90s, our government decided to create a much larger overall program, which we now call personnel recovery, which involves all aspects of rescue and recovery and search and all that kind of stuff. And I had the opportunity, after I started doing my writing that I've done about that subject matter, some people from that agency found me and offered me a job working for them in an official capacity, which gave me the opportunity then to look at this mission set, not just through the lens of Southeast Asia, but also our later conflicts in Desert Storm and the Bosnia, and then OIF and OEF, and develop a larger knowledge about all of that, which I did. And so that's kind of the cue for me to, in the summertime, work with the cadets in the combat survival training to try to help them understand the historical perspective of all of that, and make sure that they realize that this stuff we're trying to teach them about combat search or combat survival training, it didn't start yesterday. We've been at this a long time.
Absolutely. And
we've learned a lot of hard lessons. And so we want to pour these lessons into their heads, because anybody now looking at all at the future realize that there are big dangers ahead. And we may have to call upon our young men and women to go out and fly those tough missions again for us. And some of them are going to get shot down. And when they do, we want to make sure that they have every possible tool that we can give them, both physically and mentally, so that we can do everything we can to try to rescue them. And of course, we want to make them understand that they are key to their own rescue, that nobody cares more about the rescue than they do. So if we can equip them and train them to know what to do and how to do it and everything, the potential of their being successfully rescued just goes up exponentially.
Okay, yeah.
So that's the value of history right there.
Yeah,
so from a teaching perspective, that's primarily what I have been doing.
Okay.
You betcha, that more than anything else.
Yeah, very valuable teaching indeed. So I'd like to get into your writing, but first I just want to offer a word of thanks to our listeners and to let everyone know that Heritage Minutes and Heritage Minutes specials are all available anytime at usafa.org/heritage hub. That's usafa.org/heritage hub. Heritage Minutes publish the first and third Sundays in audio and video. Heritage Minutes specials like this one drop the second and fourth Sunday of every month. You can also find us by searching Heritage Minutes on YouTube, and you can catch This Day in Air Force Academy History every day on KAFA, the Academy's radio station, 97.7 FM, or online at usafa.edu/radio. Well, let's finish up talking about writing. You've done quite a bit of writing. What all have you done writing? One I want to talk about in particular, but in general, you've written a few books, I believe?
I've actually written 6 books.
6. Okay.
5 historical pieces, and then a novel. I've not published the novel. The novel that I wrote was about a young Air Force Academy graduate who goes off to war and ends up getting killed. And it's a parallel, if you will, to my own experiences and the experience of others. But it was my letting go of the war. That's why I wrote it. It was I think a good therapy, because I had come home with a lot of hard memories from the war, and I carried them for maybe too long. And I finally found out that through the process of writing it down, I let it go. And so this is one of the things that I mentioned to veterans, and I encourage all of them to take the time to write things down. We all live interesting lives. We're all engaged in things all the time, and you have to remember what history is. It's not what happened. It is what is recorded, okay? Yeah. And that's a process. So like here, we're recording some of this history, okay? But the basic way of doing it is just to write things down. And it's almost like it's a dying art form now. It should not be, because we've all lived interesting and compelling and consequential lives, and it's worth writing it down, if for no other reason just to let these stories go, but more importantly for family histories, or maybe you've been involved in some very consequential event, and your perspective, your part of that story could be key to understanding the entire thing. See, and so that's why I emphasize that to folks to do that. It's very important. But and that kind of parallels my own experiences. When I was in Southeast Asia, I noted a lot of things, and I wrote a few things down and everything, and stories and missions, and a lot of those I've turned into magazine articles and stuff like that. But it wasn't really until the late 1980s when I decided to start doing some formal writing, and it occurred specifically because when I was over there in 1972, my squadron was involved in a big rescue operation that's known as Bat-21. And this was an Air Force airplane that was shot down in South Vietnam in April 72. It turned out to be the largest and longest search and rescue mission of the whole war. And my squadron was involved in that. I was not personally, because I was just a young nugget lieutenant at the time. I hadn't been there long enough to have this kind of experience. But I remember the participants talking about that mission.
Was that Dale Stovall's mission?
No.
Oh, no, different. Sorry.
Stovall comes later.
Okay, sorry.
Anyway, I remember when this mission occurred, and one of my squadron aircraft was shot down in that. One of our guys was captured. The other guy was rescued. And when he came back and he told us the story of all that. So a lot of this was very fresh in my mind. And then in 1988, the movie Bat-21 came out. And I had to go see this movie. So I went with my wife, and I was absolutely appalled at how screwed up and messed up the story was by Hollywood. They completely ruined the whole story. And I remember walking out of there that night and turning to my wife and saying, even I can do better than that.
To document what
so that was the impetus for me to go in and then do the research and the writing and everything to try to tell that story as honestly and as accurately as I could. And when I did that, about 6 months later, I was contacted by some personnel from the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency who said, "We want you to go to work for us." And I said, "Doing what?" "What you did in that book." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We want you to do historical research and writing, and we're going to use that in our academic courses here in the agency." So that led to 15 years of my working with the agency there. And then that gave me the opportunity to get into a lot of restricted archives and places like that where there's all kinds of information out there. And that gave me, and that got me started on writing what then became my book about combat search and rescue in Desert Storm. And then after that, based upon those two works, I was offered a job on a contract with the Office of Medical History of the Army Surgeon General to do a book on medevac for the Army. Army medevac is to the medevac to the Army is what combat search and rescue is to the Air Force. It's foundational to their service, and there are a lot of parallels between the two missions. So I was able to do that. And then I got hired to do a book for AFSOC on the Pavlo helicopters. And then after I retired from all that, I decided to do a book about Rescue 1972, which was, again, I was there that year, but none of us wanted to be the last guy shot down or captured in the war. So rescue was a big deal that year. It was very important to all of us. And so I wrote that book, and that was published just a couple years ago. So that's the 5 books that I've published. That last book's called Moral Imperative, Combat Search and Rescue in 1972. And in there, one of the stories that I relate in there is a rescue that took place in North Vietnam in June of 1972, commanded by a young Air Force captain by the name of Dale Stovall, class of 1967. And interestingly enough, when I did all my research, I discovered that for all of the tremendous things that our rescue forces did in 1972, there was no Medal of Honor for that community, for anybody. So I went back and I looked through some more, and I found this one mission that occurred in June of 72. A young aircraft commander by the name of Dale Stovall took his crew into North Vietnam and ran an absolutely incredible rescue for 2 guys that were on the ground. And I looked at that mission and I thought, gosh, what awards did they get for this mission? Turned out that there were 2 helicopters involved, and the squadron commander decided to give everybody on both helicopters Silver Stars. Well, why would they do it that way? Well, because he saw it as an opportunity to get some of his enlisted troops the opportunity to get some higher level awards, which was an honorable thing to do, certainly. But a Silver Star is an individual award. So even though each crew was submitted for the war, in the package, they had to designate exactly what each individual did on that particular mission. And when I read through the stuff that Dale Stovall was cited for, I realized, wait a minute, he did a lot more than this. And so I extracted his piece of all of that out of that and did a whole bunch more research and analysis on that and decided to submit him for a Medal of Honor for that mission. And I put all that stuff together, and in April of last year, I physically took it to Washington and delivered it to the office of Senator Daines in Montana. Subsequently sent a copy to the office of Senator Tester from Montana. And that award nomination has been forwarded and is being worked through the process literally as we speak. And so if it is approved, Dale Stovall will be our only living graduate with the Medal of Honor. And interestingly enough, the aircraft that he flew on that mission, tail number 357, is sitting in the Air Force Museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
So again, that process is working through as we speak. Haven't heard anything about it for a while. It takes a long time to adjudicate all that.
Process.
And of course, now that we have an administration change in Washington, that could slow everything down. Who knows who the new SEC-AF will be and everything else. But anyway, so that was one of the things that came out of my research. And so it's kind of an ongoing process, that one thing stimulates the next. And so I don't know that I'll do any more books. Maybe I'll get my novel published someday. But again, I tell young men and women, get involved in this process. I said the hardest part of taking on a project like this is starting, because you procrastinate and you dog eat your homework and this and that and everything else. I'll get to it next week. And you just keep putting it off. Yeah. But the stories aren't going anywhere. They're still there, okay? And then once you get writing, the hardest thing to do is decide when to turn it off.
Stop.
Because one thing stimulates another, and then this and that and everything else. And one thing that really helped me in this whole process of literally learning how to write like this was that when I was doing my writing, I reached out to fellow graduates, guys like Phil Meilinger, very dear friend of mine, class of 70, and another gentleman by the name of Earl Tilford, who was an Air Force officer, both of whom have published extensively in various venues. And they were more than generous in taking the time to review my work, giving me lots of pointers, and editing for me and everything to really discover how you take a story like that and you pound it into a document that is publishable and then readable by people on the street. Right. There's an art form there. There really is. And things that you have to learn how to do that. And so to this point, like I say, I've published 5 books. I might have one more out there that I want to do, but who knows? I'm living the good life now here in Colorado.
Well, you did mention magazine writing, and closer to home as we finish up here, I must say you're the author of one of the best stories our Checkpoints magazine has ever published, the tale of the dedication ceremony of the F-105 static display in May 1968. For those of you who don't know, a pilot accidentally broke the sound barrier and blew out scores of windows in Mitchell and Vandenberg Hall, among other places. So that was quite the ceremony, huh?
Well, it was. I was in 7th Squadron at the time, and I remember that day very clearly. 7th Squadron lined up literally right next to the F-105, so we had a ringside seat to all of this. And when that thud came roaring over there and blew out all the windows, I mean, there was this huge gasp. And then there were 3,000 guys standing there on that ramp that day saying, I want to be that guy. and one legend that has come out of that, and I've heard various versions of this, but of course, as I mentioned before, our commandant at that time was Brigadier General Robin Olds, who was himself a veteran of that war and quite the quintessential fighter pilot. But as that airplane roared by and blew out all the windows, he was yelling. And standing next to him was the superintendent, General Mormon, who was saying, Robin, shut up. Because it was a disaster, but it was a glorious disaster. And I know I had one classmate who's told me that when he got here for the academy, he kind of wandered through the experience until that day. And when he saw that thud rip across the academy, he knew exactly what he wanted to be, and he spent his whole life career flying fighters for the United States Air Force.
Focus. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. That was quite a day.
Yeah. Any final words for our audience?
No. Again, I would encourage other classes when you're doing your reunions. If your class is a war class in any capacity, consider doing something like this, because again, I've gotten lots of good feedback from my classmates for doing this, and it is something that we as graduates have to face. We graduate out of here as Air Force officers or now Space Force officers, and like I say, there are dangerous times ahead, and so many of our classes have produced young men and now women who have gone off and fought our nation's wars. And there can be some lingering trauma from all of that. So it would be worthwhile for them, say the classes from the 80s who flew Desert Storm, or the classes of the 90s who flew Bosnia and then Iraq and Afghanistan. Gosh, our United States Air Force, whenever we're going to get in any conflict, we're going to be involved, and that means that our young men and women from this very institution are going to be flying those airplanes.
Absolutely. And not to wait 55 years to do that?
Well, I would hope that you would not. I'm proud of my class for having finally done this. I I wish that we had done it sooner, but hindsight's always 20/20. Take the opportunity when you can.
Yep. We've been visiting with Colonel Darrel Whitcomb. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, certainly.
I'm Steve Simon. Thanks for listening. Find more episodes at usafa.org/heritagehub.